Hello fellow steepers and stitchers, and welcome to Around the World in 80 Teas. My name is Sarah and this is the series in which I am exploring the superhero origin story of tea. Today is the story of how tea made it across the sea from China into Japan, and it starts exactly where our last video left off. And I feel like I need to say that in the previous video where I was looking at green brick tea, I ballsed up. I made a tea with way too much salt and I overboiled it, and I feel that I have done a disservice to Lu Yu, who was the tea master who wrote down that recipe, to you the viewer, and quite honestly, I absolutely owe my taste buds a massive apology because it was grim. So, as that is where our journey starts today, I figured I would have a do-over because what the heck. And so, here we go. Green brick tea, take two. So as you can see, kind of not green, it looks like a black tea. And this time I added much less salt, just a tiny bit of salt. I didn't overboil it, and from the video you will note that I strained it instead of ladling it. So I figured that way it would be a little clearer in the mug and you would be able to see what it looks like. So here we go. Fingers crossed, less salt equals better tea. Less salt equals better tea. This is actually, yeah, nice. It's somewhere between a green tea and a black tea in kind of terms of taste. There is a little bit of a bitter tang at the end of it. I've gotten really self-conscious about swallowing because the microphone just picks it up so badly. So I'm really sorry. I think I just have to go for it. This is, yeah, a little astringent. I think that's the word I'd use for it, astringent. I can't say I'd want to drink lots of this, but it's not bad, and it's certainly nowhere near as utterly horrific as the last video. I felt so bad. So yeah, there we go. There we go. Tang tea done the correct way. And this is the tea that visiting Buddhist monks from Japan to China would have experienced when they were there in the 800s. There are two Japanese monks of note, and I am going to apologize at the very top of this video for butchering the Japanese language just as well as I have butchered the Chinese language so far. I have looked up how to pronounce several of these. Well, I've looked up how to pronounce all of the names that I'm going to attempt to say in this video. I can't guarantee it's going to go well, so please bear with me. And if you are a Chinese or a Japanese speaker and there is anything that I say in any of these videos that are incorrect, please do pop down into the comments and tell me off and tell me how best to pronounce them. So in the reign of Prince Shoshotoku, which corresponds to the beginning of the Tang dynasty in China, there was an increase of Buddhism in Japan. And there were two monks in particular who are noted for their travels to China, and they are called, here we go, I'm so sorry, Seichicho and Kukei. They traveled to China and they learned all about Buddhism, and they also learned all about tea. And then when they returned to Japan, they took with them things from China, including tea. And at this point, Japan and China were trading quite happily with each other, and so there was a flow of goods to and from each country. In 1794, there was an imperial palace built called the Capital of Peace in Kyoto. And whilst that palace was being built, a tea garden was built there. And a caretaker was appointed by the government for that tea garden. And that caretaker's job came under the remit of the medical bureau. So that kind of gives you an indication of how Japan viewed tea. Very much as China did. It was something that was drunk a lot in monasteries, and its health benefits were recognized. In the year 805, Saichicho, who is also known as Dengyo Dashi, planted seeds of tea plants that he had been given in China at a tea garden on Mount Hiei, which is near Kyoto. And there is still a tea garden there to this day. So it is over 1,000 years old, which I think is pretty darn impressive. Tea at this point was quite popular within the royal household and the upper echelons of society, as well as in the Buddhist temples. However, in the 9th century, so late 800s, China and Japan fell out. And that's kind of putting it mildly. They really just didn't get on very well, and each country closed its borders to the other for 200 years. So Japan saw a rapid decline in the popularity of tea and a rapid decline in the popularity of all things Chinese. During the 11th century, the relationship between Japan and China had grown decidedly more friendly. And this now corresponds with the Song dynasty in China. Once again, monks from Japan traveled to China to learn about Buddhism, and specifically studied in southern China where Zen Buddhism was being practiced. Again, with the opening of the borders, this saw a rise in the popularity of tea. During the Song dynasty, the production and the preparation of tea had actually changed a little in China. So when the monks went back to China and were learning all about tea, it was slightly different from the tea that the original monks back in the 800s had encountered. So instead of the tea being fired, ground, and then added to boiling water, what was in fact happening was the tea was being fired, ground, placed in a bowl, and then boiling water was added to the tea. And it's worth noting that the tea was ground into a much finer powder. This combination of powder and hot water was then whisked using a bamboo whisk and was known as whipped tea. So for those of you who may be fans of tea already, you may be thinking, that sounds a little familiar to something that is currently exceptionally popular and known as a superfood. My word, what could it be? Oh yes, we are talking about matcha. So this is where matcha comes from. Matcha has become very much known as a Japanese drink, but in fact, as we have now found out, it originates in China. Matcha is still produced in China, however, it is produced to a much lesser degree than it is produced in Japan. And that is because later on in Chinese history, powdered tea fell very much out of favour, was no longer used. During the Song dynasty, tea enthusiast Tao Gu wrote the following about the latest trend in tea drinking. In recent times, there are those who pour hot water over tea and stir it with a spoon in such a special manner involving secret techniques so as to cause the hot water to have patterns and veins that seem like images of things. Birds, beasts, bugs, fish, flowers, grasses, and the like, with the lines as skillful as those in a painting. In an instant, however, they dissipate. Such are the transformations of tea, which contemporaries call the 100 diversions of tea. And in fact, there used to be big competitions in China with regards to who could create the most wonderful kind of concoctions in the froth of their tea. It's an amusement that is known as a daosha, tea contests. This was a competition to basically see who was the most skillful in preparing tea, and whoever's froth stuck to the edge of their bowls the longest would win. Those who shrunk away from the edge first would be the first one knocked out. Now, if the froth stuck to the edge, it was known as biting the cup, and if the froth dissipated or came away from the edge, it was known as having cloudy feet. And I absolutely love these descriptions. I think it's wonderful. It really was a testament to the skill of the tea maker. So heating the cup to just the right temperature, the water to just the right temperature, having just the right amount of tea powder in the cup or the bowl, and using the correct technique, using the correct tools. It became a big thing during the Song dynasty in China. So before we head on over to Japan, let's take a moment and make a lovely bowl of Chinese matcha. And so, dearest steepers and stitchers, here is a bowl of Chinese matcha. Now, one of my friends, I'm not a big matcha drinker, or I haven't been until recently, but one of my friends does drink matcha, and she once described it to me as, it's really good for you and it tastes really nice, but it looks like pond water. And I would say, Megan, you are correct. It does indeed look like pond water. As you can see, I haven't managed to create much froth, just a little bit of bubbles around the edge. I think my whisking technique needs some work. But the proof, as they say, is in the pudding. Let's give it a go. Luckily, it doesn't taste like pond water. Actually, it tastes like a very nice cup of green tea. So, yeah, I think I could have used a little less powder, or maybe I needed a little more water. There's a little bit of kind of sediment forming. I don't know if you can see kind of at the bottom. And I can definitely see like silty movement as the water moves in the bowl. Also, as I drink, I can see this kind of like looming dark green dirt at the bottom of the bowl. I wonder if I give it a little... Oh yeah, hello. You can see it's kind of starting to swirl around. It's almost like a kind of a mix of... I don't know if you've ever made miso soup with the kind of the pre-prepared kind of little packets that you can get, and it doesn't quite mix in properly and you get that kind of weird separated look. It's kind of got that look going on. It does have a very, very fresh taste, however, and there's very, very little bitterness to it. In fact, I would say there is no bitterness to it. clean and fresh. Clean and fresh. I don't know how to describe this, but a little bit heavy. Is heavy even a word that you can use to describe drinking tea? I feel like I'm one of those weird wine people who kind of sniffs at a wine and goes, oh yes, I can smell the tyres. What? The taste just sits in your mouth. I think that's what I mean, is it kind of, you can still taste it in your mouth once it's gone. It sits in your mouth. I think that's what I mean by heavy. Yeah, because clearly this is not actually heavy. Yeah. Chinese matcha. Cool. Awesome. So the Chinese powdered tea is what the Japanese visiting monks in the 11th century would have experienced and then taken back to Japan. So tea and Buddhism in Japan are very, very closely linked, and that is because it was the monks who brought the tea into the country. It was also the monks who learned how to prepare it, and it was also the monasteries where it was first consumed. And that means that the rituals surrounding tea in Japan are very much tied in to the rituals of Buddhism. It is something that the tea used to be served in the monasteries first thing when the monks were gathering, and they developed a ritual to this. And this became known as, and I've written it down, so excuse me while I have to go look at it, sari. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. Otherwise known as the etiquette of serving tea. This is the very, very first beginnings of the now famous tea ceremony in Japan that became so important to the culture. Now, in the 11th century, tea was only drunk by monks, courtiers, warriors, and those of the upper classes in Japan. It wasn't something that was widely drunk by the general population. Tea was only cultivated at the temples, and again, this helps to create the very, very close ties between Buddhism and tea in Japan. So I'm going to go and make a bowl of Japanese matcha, but before I do, I want to explain the difference between Chinese matcha and Japanese matcha. And it's to do with how the leaves are treated to stop the oxidization process. In China, the leaves are pan-fried in a hot wok. In Japan, they actually adhere to the older style or the more traditional style of steaming the leaves. And if you remember from previous videos, that is originally how green tea was prepared in China. But this is something that kind of evolved over time in China, that actually now most green teas from China are actually kind of seared in the hot wok, or at least they were. They're now industrialized, so I'm sure they have specialized machines for that. But in Japan, the green tea leaves are steamed. So that creates a slight difference in taste to the leaves. So here we are, a bowl of Japanese matcha. Possibly slightly lighter in colour, I'm not sure. Still kind of looks like pond water. So let's give it a sip and a try. A little lighter in its taste. It's not quite as astringent as the Chinese matcha. It's a little lighter. I literally have no other way to say it. I don't know how else to say it. Do you think we should do the sniffing as well? smells like green tea. What more can you say? This is a much fresher taste. I prefer this to the Chinese one. This feels like smoother, easier to drink. I don't the Chinese one is not difficult to drink, but yeah, smoother, lighter. I prefer this. I prefer the Japanese one. Personal preference. Again, the powder's settling to the bottom. I don't think I used enough water. And again, my whisking, only some froth, some little bubbles around the outside. Yeah, I definitely prefer the Japanese to the Chinese. Like I say, the Chinese one wasn't bad and I enjoyed the taste of it, but it sat in your mouth for a little while, the taste. And whilst there is a slight aftertaste to this matcha, it's not as noticeable and it's a little fresher and, like I say, a little lighter. I wish I could better articulate what I mean by that. But I think I'm just going to dig myself a very deep hole if I try. So yeah, there we go. The two matchas, the Chinese and the Japanese. Let me know in the comments down below if you are a fan of matcha. Have you tried it? If so, was it Chinese? Was it Japanese? What did you think? How do you like it? And do you have the secret to getting a good froth? Because I would very much like to know that. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you have enjoyed this little video. If you have, please give it a thumbs up and make sure you're subscribed so that you don't miss any future videos. This has been the 4th and 5th cup of Around the World in 80 Teas. I do hope you will join me for the 6th. And in the meantime, happy steeping.